The position of the king in the early Hittite state seems not to have been very secure. One of the first recorded events in the history of Hattusas is the nomination by the nobles or grandees of a rival king in opposition to Labarnas, whose father had designated him as his successor. And the subsequent history of the kingdom is fraught with revolts and rebellions on the part of the king's kinsmen, with the king constantly struggling to preserve the internal harmony of the realm. The death of a king seems generally to have caused a constitutional crisis, which the wise monarch sought to avert during his lifetime by the public designation of his successor. These facts have been held to indicate that the Hittite monarchy was originally elective, on the supposition that the designation of the heir before the assembled nobility should be interpreted as a formal request for the assembly's assent to the appointment, without which it would not be legally valid. This theory is not in fact supported by the speech of Hattusilis I, the only extant record of a royal act of designation, for there is no suggestion in this text that the king recognized the slightest limitation of his right to appoint his successor. It is still possible to interpret the insecurity of the monarchy in early times as due to a conflict of will between the nobles with their ancient rights and the king, who was striving to establish the principle of hereditary succession. But a more plausible suggestion is that the Hittite kings were in conflict with an ancient matrilineal system of succession. The royal succession was finally regulated by King Telepinus, who enacted the following law: let a prince, the son of a wife of the first rank, be king. If there is no prince of the first rank, let one who is a son of the second rank become king. If, however, there is no prince, let them take a husband for a daughter of the first rank, and let him become king. This act of legislation marked a turning point in Hittite history. Before it, the kingdom was subject to a series of recurrent crises. After it, there was an assurance of stability, and we never again find the authority of the king challenged by ambitious noblemen. Indeed, such was its success that some 200 years later, when King Muwatallis died without leaving a legitimate heir, the throne passed without interference to Uri Teshub, the son of a concubine, and it was only after 7 years that this youth's insolence and incompetence forced his powerful uncle Hattusilis, as he claimed, to carry out a coup d'etat. The kings of the Old Kingdom styled themselves Great King, Tabarna. The title Great King belongs to the language of diplomacy and denotes the Hittite king's claim to be one of the great powers of the time, with dominion over lesser kings. The origin of the title Tabarna and its possible connection with Labarnas are uncertain. During the later empire, Tabarna is usually replaced by a title meaning my son. This must have been properly a form of address used by the king's subjects, and was certainly borrowed from the contemporary kingdoms of Mitanni and Egypt, together with the winged sun as a symbol of royalty. The Oriental conception of a king endowed with superhuman powers also makes its appearance during the imperial age. It expresses itself in the phrase hero, beloved of the god or goddess, which follows the name of all the later kings, and in a passage such as the following from the autobiography of Hattusilis III, the goddess, my lady, always held me by the hand, and since I was a divinely favored man and walked in the favor of the gods, I never committed the evil deeds of mankind. From the same period, we have numerous texts describing the elaborate rituals observed at the court and designed to protect the king from the slightest defilement. The Hittite king was never actually deified during his lifetime, but there was a recognized cult of the spirits of former kings, and so the death of a king is regularly expressed euphemistically by the phrase, "he became a god." The king was at the same time supreme commander of the army, supreme judicial authority, and chief priest. He would also, as head of the state, naturally be responsible for all diplomatic dealings with foreign powers. Only his judicial duties seem normally to have been delegated to subordinates. His military and religious ones he was expected to perform in person, and if the latter was sometimes neglected through preoccupation with distant military operations, this was regarded as a sin which would bring down the anger of the gods upon the nation. Occasionally, we even hear that important campaigns were entrusted to generals because the king was obliged to hasten back to the capital for the celebration of a festival. But normally he would be found during the summer months at the head of his troops in the field, and would devote the winter to the celebration of festivals and other religious duties at home. These involved his personal attendance at each of the main cult centers of the realm, and there are texts describing the tours which he used to make, often in the company of the queen and the crown prince. Such texts are indeed an important source of information about the location of these cities, for they state the exact time needed for the journey from place to place. It is in his capacity as priest that we most often find the Hittite king represented on the monuments. We see him at Alayahuyuk, worshipping with hands raised before the image of a bull, the symbol of the weather god, or at Malatia, pouring libations before the great weather god of Hatti himself. On these and all other monuments, he wears a special costume consisting of a long garment reaching to the ankles, and over it an elaborate shawl draped over one arm and under the other, with the end hanging down freely over the front of the body. His headdress is apparently a close-fitting cap, and he carries a long crook resembling the liturus of the Roman augurs. This was the costume of the sun god.